All right. Welcome back, everybody. We are going to be moving into chapter 12 today. We'll start with 12.1, and we're going to be looking at Jacksonian democracy and states' rights. We're going to be working on this for a few days here. Some of you might have guessed who this guy is right there. That is Andrew Jackson. You remember him from the Battle of New Orleans at the end of the War of 1812. Well, he's back. Not that he really ever went away, but he has his eyes on the presidency. So let's take a look at our learning objectives for today. We'll be able to explain how expanded voting rights led to the election of Andrew Jackson, and you'll be able to define Jacksonian democracy. All right, so a little bit of review before we get into new content. So going back to the previous chapter, 11.3, sectionalism, if you remember, is loyalty to the interests of one's own region or section of the country, and it began to emerge as a force in America. Remember, we're talking about regions a little bit. We would be considered the upper Midwest or maybe the Great Lakes region. There are other regions, of course, too, like New England and the South. The Monroe Doctrine was declared that the Western Hemisphere was officially closed to European colonization. So that doesn't just mean the United States. That means all of Latin America and South America too. The whole Western Hemisphere was closed to European colonization or further efforts by European countries to colonize the North American continent or the South American continent. And voting rights in the U.S. were reserved or limited to just property-owning white males. That's where we left off. That's going to change here pretty quickly. So follow along, gang. All right, so back to that idea of sectionalism. Sectionalism was a major force in politics by the time that the 1820s rolled around. Different regions of America, I just listed a few of them for you right here, had interests that were quite different from the interests of other regions. So for example, in the North was focused on factories and manufacturing and trade. In the South, remember, the Southern economy depended on plantations, which in turn relied on slavery. We talked a little bit last week, I think, about the cotton boom. Once the invention of the cotton gin in 1793 by Eli Whitney hit the South, it made cotton farming way, way more profitable, and it led to an explosion in the cotton industry and also rapid growth and extensive growth of slavery. So the West down here, pioneers were excited by new settlements on cheap, abundant land. Lots of land to go around on this continent. All right, so politics at the time. We talked a little bit earlier about the Federalist Party. You remember some of the big names from the Federalist Party be Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, John Adams. That was no longer a force in government. They kind of fell apart around the War of 1812. That meant that there was only one political party with support across the country, and that party was the Democratic Republican Party. Now, I addressed this once before. I don't want you to think that, oh, it's just the Democrats and the Republicans combined. No, this is a different thing entirely, and you'll see in the next month or so in class the evolution of political parties in this country. But there was just one party left, and it was called the Democratic Republican Party. So here's where sectionalism comes in. So one might think, and I know I would for sure, that if there was only one political party in 1824, it would be easy to elect a president. Well, you'd think there'd be a lot of agreement, being there only one party. That makes sense until you understand what sectionalism does to the whole process of holding a national election. All right, so to begin with, 4 candidates, it was originally 6, but it was narrowed down to 4 candidates, ran for president in the year 1824, and they were all from that same party, the Democratic Republican Party. So remember, they're all from the same party. That means that all the candidates probably had similar views and goals for the country. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in the same party if they didn't have the same goals. Because they were seen as very similar, sectionalism played a role in what candidate voters chose. That meant that people from different regions voted for a candidate based on where they lived. Another important factor in determining who somebody would vote for was the personality and maybe like the likability and the relatability of some of these candidates. So these are the candidates for the election of 1824. We got Andrew Jackson over here, famous for being on the $20 bill, among other things. He was the hero of the War of 1812, the Battle of New Orleans. John Quincy Adams, the son of John Adams. John Adams was the second president of the United States. This is his son right here. Henry Clay, the Speaker of the House from Kentucky. We talked about him
when we discussed the Missouri Compromise. He's known as the Great Compromiser. And then finally, we have William Crawford from he's the Treasury Secretary. He's from Georgia. So we look at people from different places. We have John Quincy Adams is from Massachusetts. We have a guy from Georgia here, William Crawford. We have Henry Clay from Kentucky, and we have Andrew Jackson, who is from Tennessee. So here's what happens. This is craziness. This is one of several really, really controversial elections in American history. So in the election of 1824, Andrew Jackson wins the most electoral votes with 99, but he does not win a majority. Remember, a majority is 1 over half, okay? So if you add up all these electoral votes, 99 does not make a majority for him. So we have John Quincy Adams. He gets 84 votes in the Electoral College, so a little bit behind Andrew Jackson. Then dropping down quite a bit, we have William Crawford. He finishes third with 41, and Henry Clay finishes fourth with 37. So this is an electoral map that shows you where support was strongest for a lot of these people. So back to the whole idea of sectionalism, you can see John Adams was from Massachusetts, and he kind of claims the majority of votes from the northeastern region of the United States. So New England and then New York right here. And you see some support scattered around here also. So review from when we were doing our civics unit, what happens when the winner does not get a majority of electoral votes? This also happened in the election of 1800, which we talked about a couple weeks ago. So the House of Representatives decides the winner. Remember, at this time, Henry Clay is the Speaker of the House. Okay, he's also the first and only Speaker of the House who was appointed or selected for that position in their first term as a representative in the House. So this is where things get kind of fishy. Henry Clay, because he is finished fourth in the election, he is immediately taken out of the running. So they're only going to go from the 3 top vote getters. So we have Jackson, we have Crawford, and we have Adams. So Henry Clay uses his influence as Speaker of the House to increase support for Adams. One of the reasons why he does that is he does not like Andrew Jackson. And you'll find as we go forward these next couple of days, there's a lot to not like about Andrew Jackson. Okay, he's a controversial man to this day. The House of Representatives selects John Quincy Adams, I should put there. John Adams was an old man at this point. So this is John Quincy Adams. I got to change that in the slides. He becomes the 6th president of the United States. So some stuff down here you got to know. This is a stinging defeat for Andrew Jackson. He won the most electoral votes and the most popular votes, yet he was still not the winner. Jackson believes that a corrupt bargain took place in the House, which cost him the election. He has some evidence to back up his belief that there was a corrupt bargain because Henry Clay then is named John Quincy Adams Secretary of State. Now, back in those days, Secretary of State was kind of like the stepping stone to becoming president. Now you think of like presidents as being governors or senators. I mean, the guy we have now, he wasn't either one of those things. But back then, Secretary of State was kind of seen as being on the path to the presidency. So what did Jackson do? Well, he believed the election had been stolen from him. He believed that the will of the people had been ignored. Well, he feels that way because he not only got the most electoral votes out of the batch of candidates, but he also got the most popular vote. More people voted for him than any other candidate. So he began planning to come back and win the election in 1828. So some of the things he did is he portrayed himself as the common man. This appealed to a lot of Americans, especially those who were not wealthy, privileged, or highly educated. The divisions of sectionalism continued to expand, and the Democratic Republican Party ended up splitting in 2. This kind of reminds me of what we'll get to when we get to the election of 1860, right on the eve of the Civil War. So Jackson's supporters become the Democratic Party. This is where they get the donkey or jackass mascot for the party too. And then John Quincy Adams supporters became the National Republican Party. So up to this point, we did this in our review, we mentioned this, only land-owning white males were eligible to vote. So Jackson spends time and effort between 1824 and 1828 advocating or supporting the expansion of voting rights. So many states reduced the restrictions on who can vote in election. So it kind of really took away the property ownership as a qualifier for voting. So even if you did not own property anymore or land, I mean, you could now vote. So this meant that the number of people eligible to vote dramatically increased. And the people who are now allowed to vote that weren't allowed to vote before are the what Jackson might call the common people, the people that really, really supported him. So this expansion of voting rights is really going to benefit Andrew Jackson. So the expansion of political power to include more people in America became known as Jacksonian Democracy. So here's what happens then. 4 years after that controversy, the election of 1828, we can still see, just using the colors on this map, the impact of sectionalism. We see that John Quincy Adams' support is pretty much limited to New England. He's got some support here in New York State, and then he's got Delaware and Maryland and New Jersey right there. But the rest of this area, is a huge part of the country, that is unanimous support for Andrew Jackson. So in this election, because of the expanded voting rights, many more people could vote than in previous elections, and this would work in Andrew Jackson's favor. Andrew Jackson, you can see, easily defeats John Quincy Adams in a dirty, nasty campaign. This is one of the dirtiest ones ever. Andrew Jackson's wife was dragged through the mud. There were a lot of rumors spread about her. She ended up, I think, right after the election and before the inauguration, or very close to the election, she dies, has a heart attack, and Jackson spends the rest of his life blaming the stress of that campaign and the rumors that were spread about her by his opponents for her death, and he is a bitter, bitter man. So Jackson becomes the 7th president of the United States, and we will pick up from there next time. It's going to get really, really interesting, and we're going to talk about some unpleasant chapters from our history when we look at the 7th president of the United States. All right, hang in there, guys. We'll see you soon.